They did not simply call me unmarriageable. They said I was the last breath in my father's line. They said no gentleman of rank would kneel before a ruined bride. They said the House of Windermere would die inside my chair. For 3 long years I listened to them. 3 years of polished teacups and silk gloves and mothers who smiled at me as though I were already in the grave. So when my father, Wilfred Humphrey, Duke of Windermere, rose from his desk one winter evening, set aside the letter he had been reading, and told me he was giving me into the keeping of the strongest enslaved man on the Windermere holdings, London expected ruin. What London got was scandal. What London got was war inside a great house. What London got was a love story they could not bury, not with gossip, not with law, not with all the drawing-room knives in England. My name is Tatiana Humphrey. I was 22 years old, the only child of a duke, and everyone in Mayfair had already measured me for my coffin. They were wrong. They were wrong about me. They were wrong about him, and before the last candle burned down in my father's study, they would all be made to see how wrong they had been. Cruelty sounded gentlest when it was dressed in silk. I learned that truth in the drawing rooms of London, where I had been paraded, inspected, and quietly discarded for 3 seasons running. The women sipped their tea and pretended not to stare at the wheeled chair beside me. The men bowed, spoke of the weather, and found reasons to take their leave before the second pot was poured. They did not shout their verdicts. They whispered them, behind fans, into the ears of their mothers, over port in my father's own dining room, when they believed I had been wheeled away to bed. The accident had come when I was 19. A carriage horse, startled by a hound on the drive at Windermere Park, had bolted and overturned the phaeton I was riding in. I remember the sky turning, the wheel beside my face, the strange silence that came after. When I woke, I could move my arms and my hands and my head. My legs, from the hip downward, belonged to someone else. A body I had once trusted had become a room I could no longer enter. My father had wept that night. I had never seen him weep before, and I have only seen him weep twice since. The surgeons came, then more surgeons, then a man from Edinburgh who pressed his thumbs into my spine and said, in a voice as dry as old parchment, that I might regain a little, in time. With patience and the grace of God, I regained a little. Enough to stand with help, for short moments. Not enough to walk down a church aisle on my own. Not enough, as London soon decided, to be a wife. My father did not surrender. He was Wilfred Humphrey, 6th Duke of Windermere, a man who had bent Parliament and wheedled kings and carried a name older than the crown itself. He spent 2 years arranging what he called prospects. Quiet visits, careful dinners, introductions made in libraries so that I might be seen while seated. Every one of them ended the same way. Lord Cosmo Pembury, who was kind, came 3 times and then retreated with a letter about his mother's health. Sir Tobias Addington, who laughed too loudly and drank too much at dinner, left a note the next morning saying he had been called back to his regiment, though he had no regiment to return to. The Honorable Mr. Richard Foster came twice. He did not bother with letters. He took the trouble of calling on my father in person. I was in the morning room when Richard Foster's voice reached me through the open study door. He did not know I could hear him. Or perhaps he did not care. He had the kind of voice that believed every room it entered was its own. "Your Grace," he said, in a tone meant to be regretful and was not, "it is a question of the future of the Foster name. A wife must stand beside her husband. A wife must bear him sons. Your daughter is, forgive me, a ruin in lace. A beautiful one, but a ruin." I had not cried in 3 months. I did not cry then. I simply set down the novel I had been pretending to read and looked out at the bare January garden until the door closed behind him. That night my father sent the last of his tentative invitations out into London society. Within a fortnight, every one of them had been declined. Within a month, the whispers in the clubs had hardened into a verdict. The word was passed along Pall Mall and into Belgravia and across the drawing rooms of every house that mattered. The Windermere girl was unmarriageable. A burden. A mistake of fate. The end of a line. Then a letter came from Jamaica, from the overseer of the family's colonial estate, a property my father had inherited from his own grandfather, and which still bore the aftershocks of a trade England had outlawed 14 years before. The letter was brief. There had been unrest. Debts had been called in. A man was being sent back to Windermere under my father's direct order. a man whose presence on the plantation had become, the overseer wrote, a matter of very great concern. The letter was dated the 2nd week of December. By the 4th week of December, Otto Arthur had been brought up the drive at Windermere Park, hands unshackled by my father's express command. Under a sky the color of old pewter, I did not see his arrival. I heard it, the footman whispered. The housekeeper crossed herself. My maid, Olympia, came into my room that evening with her eyes very wide and told me, in a voice she tried to keep steady, that the largest man she had ever seen in her life was standing in the back hall, silent as a closed door. 3 nights later, my father summoned me to his study. The candles were trembling. I remember that clearly. There were 6 of them on his desk, and every one of them was trembling, as though the air in the room had learned, before I had, what was about to be said. He was standing by the fire. He did not turn to face me. He spoke to the flames. "Tatiana," he said, "I have made a decision. It will ruin my name in London. It may ruin yours for a time, but I have chosen it, and I will not unchoose it. You will be placed under the keeping of Otto Arthur. He will guard you. He will answer to me in all things concerning you. And he will be the shield between you and the men who would devour what is left of this house once I am in the ground." I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. My father turned at last. His face was gray. He looked, for the first time in my life, like a man who had run out of roads. "I have 6 months, perhaps a year," he said. "The physicians have told me this morning. Your cousin Robert will move the moment I am gone. Richard Foster will lend him teeth. And you, my darling, will be alone in a house that will not be yours, with no husband to stand for you and no brother to raise a sword. I will not permit that. I would rather be called a madman in every club in London than a coward at the gates of heaven." I should have argued. I should have wept. Instead, I heard myself say, very quietly, "Father, have you spoken to him?" He held my eyes for a long moment. "Tomorrow," he said. "You will meet him tomorrow. And then, Tatiana, you will tell me whether I have been a fool or a father." That was the last night I slept as the girl London had written off. In the morning, a door would open. A man who should not have been able to walk through it would duck to pass beneath the frame, and the whole course of my life would turn on whether I had the courage to look up from my lap and meet his eyes. "Reader," I looked up. "Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. I am working toward 1,000 subscribers, and if Tatiana Humphrey's story has already hooked you, please hit that subscribe button for this channel. Smash the like, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. Alright, thank you. Now let us get back to Tatiana's story. There is a particular shade of pity in a woman's smile that is worse than hatred. I had learned to recognize it by the time I was 20. It arrived a half-second after the eyes moved from my face to the wheeled chair and back again. It pretended to be kindness. It was, in fact, a verdict. The first of the suitors had come in the spring of my 21st year. His name was Cosmo Pembury. He was a second son from Wiltshire, mild and well-mannered, with the sort of fair hair that went colorless in strong sunlight. He called 3 times at Windermere House. On the 3rd visit, he sat across from me in the green parlor and spoke, at length, about the drainage improvements on his brother's estate. He did not once look at the chair. I have thought often about that courtesy. Whether it was tenderness, or whether it was the kind of politeness that pretends a thing does not exist so it will not have to be named. He left that afternoon with a bow and a promise to return within the fortnight. He did not return. A letter came instead, saying his mother's health had taken a turn, and that he must withdraw to the country. His mother lived another 19 years. Sir Tobias Addington came next. He was a cavalry officer without a regiment, living on the last of his father's goodwill. He drank claret at dinner as though it were water, laughed too loudly at jokes my father did not make, and asked me, over the soup, whether it was true that a woman in my condition could still feel the presence of her legs, as though they were there. I set down my spoon. I did not answer. My father, who had been cutting his mutton with great precision, laid down his knife and said, in a voice as soft as a closing door, that Sir Tobias would be taking his leave after the fish course, and that the carriage had already been called. Richard Foster came twice. The first time, he was charming. The second time, he was not. He was a man who wore his name like a medal he had not earned, a second cousin to an earl, a member of 3 clubs, and the sort who believed that the world's attention was a birthright owed to him by the mere fact of his breathing. He had small, pale hands. He used them a great deal when he spoke. On his second visit, he stood before the fire in my father's study, sipped the brandy my father had poured him, and said the words I have already repeated, a ruin in lace. A beautiful one, but a ruin. My father, who had heard them from the other side of the desk, did not strike him. He did not rise. He simply looked at Richard Foster over the rim of his glass, as though he were cataloguing a stain on the carpet, and he said, "You may finish your brandy, Mr. Foster, and then you will leave my house. You will not return. I would prefer, on the whole, to bury my daughter than to bury her beside you." Richard Foster left. He did not forget. Men like Richard Foster never do. By the end of that season, 11 invitations had been declined. By the end of the next, it was 14. I stopped counting after the 17th. My maid, Olympia, stopped announcing them. My father stopped mentioning them at breakfast. A silence settled over the house, the particular silence of a family that has given up on a certain conversation. I did not give up on the conversation. I had other conversations with myself. At night, when the house was dark, I would sit by my window and look out over the garden, and I would ask myself what a woman was supposed to be if she could not walk down an aisle. I had read my scripture. I had read my Austen. I had read, in secret, a great deal of poetry my governess had not approved of. None of it had prepared me for the particular business of being a shelf on which a great name had been set down to gather dust. I was not, I thought, a stupid woman. I could read 3 languages. I could keep a ledger. I had, since my mother's death when I was 12, quietly managed the household accounts for my father, who had never quite understood why the kitchen demanded so much coal. I had opinions about the tenant cottages. I had opinions about the new railway line that was being proposed across the southern edge of our land. I had, in short, a great many opinions, and not one of them mattered to the men who came to look at me. They came to see whether I could walk. That was the only opinion they wanted. On the evening before my father summoned me to his study, I overheard Olympia and the housekeeper, Mrs. Halliday, speaking in the passage outside my room. Olympia was a slight Welsh girl, no older than I was. With dark hair she wore braided tightly against her head. She had been with me since the accident. She was the only person in the world, other than my father, who had seen me weep and kept her mouth closed about it. They are saying in the village, Mrs. Halliday was murmuring, that the foster boy has been speaking ill of Miss Tatiana at his club, that she cannot have children, that she is, begging your pardon, a waste of good lace. He is a snake, Olympia said quietly. He is a snake with a name, said Mrs. Halliday, and names are what count in this country. I lay very still in my bed. I did not cry. I had decided, some months before, that I would not cry where servants could hear me, because it would make their lives harder and it would not mend mine. In the morning, a footman came to the door and said that His Grace requested the pleasure of my company in his study at 7 o'clock that evening. I knew, from the formality of the request, that something had changed. My father did not request pleasures at 7 o'clock. He took them whenever he chose. If he was sending a footman and a phrase, it was because he was trying, in his own stiff and difficult way, to give me time to prepare. I dressed carefully that evening. I wore the cream lace gown with the high collar that had been my mother's favorite. I let Olympia pin my hair up with the pearl combs I had not worn in a year. I did not know, sitting before the mirror, that I was dressing for the first night of the rest of my life. I only knew that the woman in the glass looked, for the first time in a long time, like someone who had not yet been told what she was. My father was not a gentle man. He was a fair one, which is not the same thing. He believed in duty the way other men believed in God, and he expected duty from every person who lived under his roof, beginning with himself. He was 61 years old the night he summoned me. His hair had gone white at the temples during the year after my mother died. His back was still very straight. His eyes, which had once been a clear gray, had lately taken on a milkier quality that I had noticed, and had not, until that evening, allowed myself to name. The study was warm. Too warm, perhaps, for an old man's lungs. A fire was burning high in the grate, and the candles on his desk were lit even though the gas lamps on the walls were already turned up. I was wheeled in by Tobias, our senior footman, who placed me near the hearth and withdrew with the particular quietness of a servant who has been given very precise instructions to see nothing and hear nothing at all. My father closed the door behind him. "Tatiana," he said, and then he was silent for a long moment. He walked to the window and looked out at the darkness. His shoulders were set in the way they were set when he was going into battle in the House of Lords. "I am dying," he said. The fire cracked. A log shifted. I remember thinking, very clearly and very calmly, that I would not scream and I would not weep, because my father had not raised me to scream or weep at news that had already half been guessed. "How long?" I said. "A year, perhaps less. Dr. Greaves was here this morning. It is the heart. It has been the heart for some time." I held the arms of my chair. They were carved walnut, smoothed by 4 years of my hands. I felt the ridges of the grain under my fingers, and I held on to them. "I am sorry, Father," I said. "Do not be sorry. Be useful. I have been sorry for 4 years, Tatiana, and it has done neither of us a particle of good." He turned from the window. He came and sat across from me, in the leather armchair that had been his father's and his father's before that. He laid his hands flat on his knees. "Robert," he said, "will move the day I am buried. He has been writing to my solicitors for 2 years. He believes, and he is correct, that under the present settlement he inherits everything that is not specifically bequeathed. He will sell the London house. He will sell the Yorkshire farms. He will keep Windermere Park because it is entailed to the title, but he will strip it. And he will place you, my daughter, in a set of rooms in Bath with a companion and an allowance small enough to remind you, every day, that you are a relict and not a rival. If you object, he will whisper in the right ears that your mind has gone. He will have a dozen men ready to swear to it. Richard Foster will be the first of them." "Richard Foster," I said, "is in Robert's pocket. I learned it last month. They dine together twice a week. They have been dining together for longer than that. Foster has not forgotten that I threw him out of this house, Tatiana. He has been waiting for me to die." I could hear my own breathing. I made it slow and quiet and even. "Then marry me to someone, Father. Anyone. I will take Cosmo Pembury if you can bring him back. I will take a curate. I will take a widower with 6 children. I am past the point of pride." "You are not," he said. "You have never been past the point of pride, and I would disown you the day you were. But it is not a question of finding a man, Tatiana. It is a question of finding a man who will not cut your throat the moment my coffin is in the ground, and Robert offers him enough. There is not one such man in London. I have looked. I have looked until my eyes ached. There is no gentleman of rank who will marry you and protect you from Robert and Foster, because every gentleman of rank in London is, in the end, a man who wants his own peace and his own profit and his own club chair by the window." I said nothing. I had not known, until that moment, that my father had continued looking. I had believed he had stopped, months before, out of mercy. He had not stopped. He had searched until he had been certain of the answer. "There is a man," he said, "on the Kingston holdings. His name is Otto Arthur. He was born in the West Indies. His mother was a house servant on a neighboring property. His father, I believe, was a Scottish overseer who had the decency to leave money for the boy's schooling before he died of fever. The boy was taught to read by a Wesleyan minister. He was bought, 8 years ago, by the man who managed our Kingston estate for me, who did not know that I had given standing instructions that no human being on my land was to be bought or sold. By the time I learned of it, the manager was dead and the boy was grown. I have been paying him a wage, privately, for the last 5 years. He does not know that I have been paying him. He believes the money is a Christmas allowance from the overseer. He has been saving it. He has nearly enough, I am told, to purchase his own manumission under the laws of that island." I stared at my father. I had not heard him speak so many words together since my mother died. "Why," I said, "are you telling me this?" "Because," he said, "I have ordered him brought here. He arrived 3 nights ago. He is in the back hall, in the servants' wing, under the charge of Mr. Halliday. He is the strongest man on any land I own. He is also, by every report I have had of him over 8 years, the most disciplined. He has never struck another man in anger. He has, twice, prevented such strikings. He reads his Bible. He reads, if the minister can be believed, a great deal more than his Bible. He has refused, twice, to be promoted to overseer himself, because he will not give orders to men he was enslaved beside. He stopped. He rubbed his eyes. When he lowered his hand, I saw that it was shaking. I intend, Tatiana, to place you under his keeping, formally, in writing. He will be your appointed guardian under my seal, with a clause I have already drawn up that grants him his freedom and a lifetime pension on the day of my death, provided you still live and are still unharmed. He will have every material reason to keep you alive, and every moral reason I can see to keep you safe. And Robert, who has been preparing to fight a widow, will find himself instead fighting a man who stands 6 feet and 6 inches, and has no fear of him, his solicitors, or his pet snake Foster. I could not speak. I tried, twice. Father, I said finally, do you understand what they will say? I understand perfectly. They will say I have lost my mind. They will say I have given my daughter to a slave. They will say the house of Windermere has ended in filth. Let them say it. I am going into a grave, Tatiana, and I would rather be spat upon by every club in London than leave you behind in a room and bath with a companion and a cat. He looked at me then. For the first time that night, he looked at me as a father and not as a duke. I am asking you, he said, to meet him, tomorrow morning, in the green parlor. If, after you have met him, you tell me that you cannot do this thing, I will burn the deed I have drawn up, and I will spend the last year of my life finding you another way. I do not promise that I will find it, but I will try. I owe you that much. I owe you a great deal more than that much. I looked into the fire. I thought of Richard Foster. I thought of my cousin Robert, whom I had met 3 times, and had disliked on each occasion without being quite able to say why. I thought of a set of rooms and bath with a companion and a cat, and I thought of how long a life could be when it was being lived in such rooms. I will meet him, I said. My father closed his eyes. Thank you, he said. Thank you, daughter. I do not believe he had ever thanked me for anything in my life before that night. I did not sleep. Olympia came at 6 in the morning and found me already awake, sitting up against my pillows with a book open on my knees that I had not been reading. She said nothing. She drew the curtains, laid out my dressing gown, and went downstairs to fetch my chocolate. I had spent the night making a list, in my head, of what I expected. I expected a man who was angry. I expected a man who resented being brought from his island to a cold English house in December to be married, in all but name, to a cripple. I expected, if I am honest, a man who might frighten me a little in ways I could not yet imagine, and I had decided that if he did, I would frighten him back. I was a duke's daughter. I had a voice. My legs had failed me, but my voice had not. I was wheeled into the green parlor at 11 o'clock. My father was already there. He was standing by the window with his back very straight. Mrs. Halliday, who acted as chaperone at such meetings, was seated in the corner with her knitting, a device she had used for 30 years to pretend she was not listening to a word that was being said. The door opened. I had been told he was tall. I had not been told what that meant in a room with a 7-foot doorway. Otto Arthur ducked under the frame. He did not only lower his head, he bent slightly at the shoulders, the way a man bends to pass through a ship's hatch. When he straightened again, inside the room itself seemed to have become smaller, as though the walls had leaned in to make space for him. He was perhaps a little under 7 feet. His shoulders filled the doorway with room to spare. He was dressed simply, in a coarse linen shirt that had been white once, and was now the color of weak tea, open at the throat, with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, plain brown trousers, leather braces, boots that had walked a great many miles. His skin was a deep, polished brown, the color of the wood of my chair. His jaw was strong and clean-shaven. There was a thin, pale scar across the base of his throat, low enough that the open collar did not quite hide it. His eyes did not look at me. They looked at the floor, 2 feet in front of his own boots, and they stayed there. My father spoke first. "Otto," he said, "this is my daughter, Lady Tatiana Humphrey. Tatiana, this is Otto Arthur, of whom I spoke to you last night." I waited. I had been taught, as a girl, that a gentleman bowed first. A gentleman had not entered the room. A man had. I did not know what the manners were. "Good morning, Mr. Arthur," I said. My voice was steadier than I had expected. I heard Mrs. Halliday's needles pause and resume. He did not raise his eyes. "Good morning, my lady." His voice was not what I had expected either. It was low and quiet and careful. There was an accent in it I could not at first place. Not London, not Edinburgh. A softness underneath, a rhythm that might have been Jamaican and might have been something older than that. I looked at my father. He was watching us both with the expression of a man who had laid a long game on a single throw of the dice and was now waiting to see what the ivory showed. "Father," I said, "might I speak to Mr. Arthur alone?" Mrs. Halliday's needles stopped again. My father did not move for a moment. Then he nodded. Once. 10 minutes, he said. "Mrs. Halliday will remain in the hall, within call." They went. The door closed. I was alone in the green parlor with the largest man I had ever seen, and he had still not looked at me. "Mr. Arthur," I said, "please, sit down." He hesitated. Then he crossed to the chair furthest from mine, a small upholstered thing meant for a dowager, and he lowered himself into it with the extreme care of a man who has broken a chair before and has learned. His knees came up higher than he clearly liked. He rested his hands, very flat, on his thighs. "My lady." "You may look at me," I said. "I am giving you leave." He lifted his eyes. They were dark and very steady, and not at all what I had expected. They were the eyes of a man who had seen a great many things and had decided, long ago, which of those things were worth speaking of. They were tired. They were not broken. And they were, when they met mine, more careful than any eyes that had looked at me in 3 years. "Has my father told you," I said, "what he intends?" "He has, my lady." "And what do you think of it?" A silence. A longer one than I had expected. "My lady," he said at last, "I think his grace is a man who loves his daughter and is running out of roads. I think he has chosen the only road he could see. I do not think he has chosen a good one. I do not think there is a good one to choose." I had not been prepared for that answer. I had been prepared for "yes, your ladyship." I had been prepared for "as you wish, your ladyship." I had not been prepared to be spoken to, in my own parlor, as if I were a thinking woman in a difficult hour. "Do you want this, Mr. Arthur?" He looked at his hands. "My lady, I have wanted, for 8 years, to be free. I have saved for it. I have prayed for it. His Grace has offered me, in writing, my freedom and a pension, on the day of his death, in exchange for keeping you safe until then and beyond. I do not know any man in my position who would refuse such a thing, but I do not call the wanting of such a thing a wanting of this. I have never wanted a wife who was given to me. I do not believe any man who has been property himself can want such a thing, if he still has his soul about him." I gripped the arms of my chair. "Then we are of one mind, Mr. Arthur. I do not want a husband who has been given to me either." He looked up again. "Then what, my lady, do you propose we do?" I had not known, until he asked it, that I had an answer. It came to me whole, as though I had been carrying it for weeks. "We shall be civil," I said. "We shall be formal. You will guard me, as my father wishes. You will take your freedom and your pension, which you have earned twice over by the sound of it. I shall be your charge, and you shall be my keeper, and we shall be, in the eyes of the world and of the law, what my father has decreed us to be. But in this room, Mr. Arthur, and in any room that we two share alone, we shall be two people who have been placed in an impossible position by a dying man who loved us both in his way, and we shall treat each other accordingly. I shall not be your mistress. You shall not be my slave. We shall be, if nothing else, two honest strangers. Does that suit you?" He was very still. "My lady," he said, "that suits me better than anything I have heard in 8 years." "Good," I said. I was shaking. I hoped he could not see it. Then we agreed. "I shall tell my father. You may go." He rose. He was enormous again, all at once, now that he was on his feet. He bowed, not deeply, but cleanly, the bow of a man who had watched others bow and had taught himself the form. At the door, he turned. "My lady?" "Yes, Mr. Arthur." "Thank you," he said, for looking up. The door closed behind him. I sat in the green parlor, in my wheeled chair, in the quiet after, and I discovered that I was crying. Not hard. Not the way I had wanted to cry in 3 years. Only a little. Only the way a person cries when a door they had thought was bricked up turns out to have been merely locked, and someone has, without warning, placed a key into their hand. The arrangement began 3 days later. My father had drawn up a careful set of rules. Otto Arthur would be given a room in the east wing, near my own apartments, with its own lock. He would accompany me whenever I left the house. He would assist Tobias and the other footmen in lifting my chair when the ground would not allow the wheels. He would not dine with the family. He would not attend chapel with the family. He would be, on paper, a kind of senior manservant with an unusual remit, and on paper we could pretend, for as long as London could be made to pretend, that nothing strange was happening at Windermere Park. London did not pretend for long. By the end of the first week, Mrs. Halliday reported that the groom at the coaching inn had been asking the stable boy unusual questions. By the end of the second, a letter arrived from my Aunt Isabella, my father's younger sister, who lived in Bath and heard everything. She wrote that a rumor was traveling through Mayfair, that His Grace of Windermere had brought a black giant up from the islands to serve as his daughter's nurse. And was it true? And if it was true, whatever could His Grace be thinking? My father read the letter aloud at breakfast. He folded it. He placed it under his teacup. "Your aunt," he said, "has always had a gift for a phrase." I did not see Otto Arthur, at first, more than once a day. He would appear in the morning at the foot of the staircase when Olympia wheeled me down to breakfast, and he would fall in quietly behind my chair and follow me wherever I went. He did not speak unless I spoke to him. He did not meet the eyes of any servant he passed. He ate his meals in the housekeeper's room, where Mrs. Halliday, who had taken against him on principle for the first 2 days and then changed her mind on the third, began to save him the larger cuts of the cold mutton. I resented him. I am not proud of it. But there is a truth to tell, and the truth is that I had, for 3 years, prided myself on how much of my own life I had managed to manage. I wheeled myself through the ground floor rooms. I called Tobias when I needed the stairs. I had, bit by bit, arranged the house around the fact of my chair until the chair had nearly ceased to be an event. And now, everywhere I went, there was a shadow at my back, a tall, silent, watchful shadow, and I hated him for the proof he was of what I had always refused to admit, which was that I could be managed. On the 4th morning, I turned my chair sharply in the corridor and said, more coldly than I had meant to, "Mr. Arthur, you will not follow me into the library. I read there. I read alone." He stopped. He stepped back 1 pace. "My lady," he said. I wheeled myself into the library and shut the door. I was shaking with a temper I did not understand. I took down a volume of Cowper's letters, and I read 3 pages without seeing them. Then I looked up. Through the glass panel of the library door, I could see him. He had not moved. He was standing in the corridor, his back to the door, his hands clasped behind him, the way a sentry stands at a post he has been given. I watched him for perhaps 5 minutes. He did not shift. He did not lean. He did not sigh. When I wheeled myself out at last, he turned as though he had known I was coming before the handle of the door had moved, and he fell in behind me again, and he said nothing. That night, I sent Olympia to fetch him. I received him in the small sitting room off my bedroom, which my father had agreed was proper, provided the door to the passage remained open and Olympia remained within earshot. He came in. He stood. I was in my chair by the fire. "Mr. Arthur," I said, "I was rude to you this morning." He did not move. "My lady, you were clear. I do not find clarity rude. You are being diplomatic." "Do not be diplomatic with me. I told you on the first day I wished you to be honest." A small thing happened at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. A movement that might, in easier circumstances, have become one. "My lady," he said, "you were rude this morning. I expect you had reasons." I did. "Then," he said, "I accept that they were good ones, because I have not known you to waste a reason." I looked at him. He looked back, and I discovered that I was, for the first time in 3 years, close to laughing. "Mr. Arthur, you are not what I expected." "My lady, I have been told that by a great many people. I no longer take it as a compliment or an insult. I take it only as information." I did laugh then, a short laugh. It surprised me more than it surprised him. "Sit down," I said. "Please. Your standing there makes me feel I am being inspected by a mountain." He sat. on the dowager's chair again. His knees came up. He did not, this time, pretend they did not. "My lady," he said, after a moment, "may I ask you a question?" "You may." "Why," he said, "did you not wish me in the library?" I thought about it. I had promised him honesty. I gave it to him. "Because," I said, "if I cannot be alone in my own library, I am not mistress of anything at all, and I have been, Mr. Arthur, for 3 years. Very carefully not being mistress of anything at all, and I have been ashamed of it. And this morning, when you followed me to the library door, I saw what I had been, and I was ashamed of it again. And I was rude to you because I could not be rude to myself." He was silent for a long moment. "My lady," he said, "do you read much in that library?" "A great deal." "Why?" "Because," he said, "if you would lend me a book now and then, I would sit in the corridor and read it, and I would not be a mountain at your door. I would only be a man with a book, who happens to be sitting outside a room." I stared at him. "You read?" "My lady," I read. "What do you read?" "Whatever is given to me. I have read the Bible 4 times. I have read Mr. Bunyan. I have read a volume of Mr. Shakespeare, the tragedies, which a Wesleyan minister left at the manager's house. I have read a book on the cultivation of cane, which was not, upon the whole, a cheerful work. Have you read any poetry that was not Bunyan?" "A little. I should like to read more." I was quiet for a long moment. Then I wheeled myself to the side table and took down the small volume of Cowper that had been my mother's, and I held it out to him. "Then you may start, Mr. Arthur, with William Cowper. He is gentle. He loved his garden. And he was, for a great part of his life, a man who could not quite walk through the world the way other men walked through it. I believe you and I shall both find him a friend." He took the book. His hand, when it closed around it, was larger than the book itself, by a clear margin. "My lady," he said, "thank you. You are welcome, Mr. Arthur. Now go to bed. I shall not need you again tonight." He rose. At the door, he turned. "My lady." "Yes." "You are mistress," he said, "of more than you think." He closed the door quietly behind him. I sat by the fire for a long time after he had gone, and I did not, for the first time in a great many nights, feel that the house was larger than I was. January turned into February. The frost held. The drive at Windermere Park became a sheet of pale iron that caught the morning sun and threw it back in splinters. I had not been out of the house, other than to chapel on Sundays, since the November before. The chair did not take kindly to frost. The wheels slipped. Tobias had injured his back the previous year, lifting me over a step, and I had grown cautious on his behalf. I had told myself I did not mind. I had told myself a great many things. On the first Tuesday in February, Otto Arthur came to me as I sat at my desk answering a letter, and he said, "My lady, the sun is on the south lawn. The path has been swept. If you wish it, I can carry you as far as the summer house and back. You have not seen the lake frozen. It is worth seeing." I looked up. "Mr. Arthur," I said, "you will not carry me. It is improper." "My lady," he said, "I have been lifting you in and out of that chair for 5 weeks. If impropriety were going to kill either of us, it would have done so already." I looked at him for a long moment. He was, I had come to notice over those weeks, a man who made jokes very seldom and very well. When he made one, there was a certain lightness at the corner of his eye that he did not otherwise permit himself. It was there now. "Very well," I said. "Fetch me my cloak." He fetched it. He stood patiently while Olympia arranged it over my shoulders. He took the chair's handles and wheeled me to the terrace door. Then, at the first of the stone steps down to the south lawn, he bent, and he lifted me out of the chair, as though I weighed no more than one of the cushions, and he carried me across the frost. I had not been carried by anyone since the day of the accident. The first few steps, I was rigid in his arms. I could feel the strength of him, the careful strength, the way a great horse stands when it knows it is carrying a child. His arm was under my knees. His other arm was across my back, under my shoulders. His face was very near mine. He did not look at me. He looked straight ahead, at the path, at the lake, at the thing he had promised me I would see. By the time we reached the summer house, I had stopped being rigid. The lake was frozen. A thin crust of snow lay on the ice, and there were the tracks of birds across it, and the low sun was coming through the stripped elms on the far bank and throwing their shadows in long bars across the white. It was very quiet. A single rook called from somewhere behind us, once, and then was quiet again. Otto Arthur set me down on the stone bench inside the summer house. He arranged my cloak. He stepped back. "My lady." "Mr. Arthur." "I shall stand at the door if you wish, and leave you to it." "No," I said. "Sit. There is room on the bench." He hesitated. Then he sat, at the far end of the bench, as far from me as the bench allowed. We did not speak for some time. The rook called again. Somewhere out on the ice, a branch cracked under its own weight and fell. "I used to skate here," I said, "when I was a child. My mother had a pair of skates made for me in Vienna, red leather. I thought they were the finest thing in the world." "My lady." "I used to think," I said, "that I would teach my own daughter to skate on this lake, that she would have red skates of her own. I used to think a great many things about a daughter I have not had." He was quiet. "My lady," he said, "my mother's name was Arthur. That is where my name came from. She was called Arthur because she belonged to a man named Arthur, on the estate next to the one I was born on. When my father gave her money to buy herself out, she chose to keep the name, because she said it had cost her too much to let it go. She died when I was 7. I have never seen her grave. I do not know where it is. I have thought, many times, that if I were free, I would go back to the island and find it, and put a stone on it, and plant something there. I do not know what I would plant. Something with a hard wood, I think. Something that would last." I looked at him. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the lake. "Mr. Arthur," I said, "when my father dies and you are free, if I am still alive, I shall buy your passage back to that island myself. You shall find your mother's grave, and you shall plant whatever you choose upon it. That is a promise. I do not break promises." He looked at me then. For perhaps the 3rd time since I had known him, he looked at me fully, without carefulness, without guard. "My lady," he said, "you are a strange woman." "I am told so." It was not an insult. I did not take it as one. He almost smiled. It did not quite arrive at his mouth. It stayed, for a moment, in the skin beside his eyes. "My lady," he said, "may I ask you something?" "You may." "Why did you not marry before the accident?" I looked out at the lake. "I was 19, Mr. Arthur. I had been out for 1 season. I had refused 2 men, because I had not liked either of them, and my father had permitted me to refuse. We thought there was a great deal of time." "My lady," he said, "you refused 2 men at 19. "I did." "Then," he said, "you were not a woman who was waiting for a man to choose her. You were a woman who had already begun to choose for herself." I did not answer. I did not trust myself to answer. We sat in the summer house until my feet, which I could not feel, would have been cold if I could have felt them. He carried me back to the terrace. He set me in my chair. He wheeled me into the warm hall. He bowed and stepped away. I sat for a long time in the hall, with my cloak still across my shoulders, before I could bring myself to ring for Olympia. That night at dinner, my father said, "Did you walk in the garden, Tatiana?" "I did," I said. "Did you enjoy it?" "I did." He nodded. He did not smile, but he ate his soup that night with the appetite of a man who had not eaten soup properly in a long time, and when I was wheeled away from the table, he said, "Good night, daughter." "Good night," twice, as though once had not been enough. The letter from my cousin Robert came in the last week of February. Robert was 34 years old, the only son of my father's younger brother, who had died of fever in India 8 years before. He had been raised in Hampshire by a mother who had believed, from the moment she had married into the family, that her husband had been cheated of his rightful inheritance by the accident of birth order, and she had passed that belief on to her son as other mothers pass on a watch or a prayer book. His letter was a masterpiece of its kind. It expressed concern for my father's health, which he had somehow learned of without my father having told him. It expressed warm regard for my own well-being. It inquired, with the gentlest possible curiosity, whether a rumor that had reached him in Hampshire could possibly be true, namely, that a servant of unusual appearance had been brought up from the West Indies and placed in a position of confidence near my person. He was certain, he wrote, that the rumor was false. He was certain, he wrote, that my father would never have made a decision so injurious to the dignity of the name. He was certain, he wrote, of a great many things, each of which was a little knife with a good handle. My father read the letter at breakfast. He folded it. He placed it under his teacup with Aunt Isabella's. "Your cousin," he said, "has always had a gift for a phrase." He wrote no reply. Robert came the following week without invitation. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a hired post-chaise, without luggage, without warning, and walked into the hall as though he had been expected. He was a man of medium height and careful grooming, with pale brown hair combed flat against his skull, and a small, neat mustache of the sort that signals, in England, that a man wishes to be taken seriously without earning it. He wore a dark gray frock coat of excellent cut. His gloves were very clean. He smiled when he saw me in the hall. "Tatiana," he said, "my dear cousin, how well you look." I had not been called my dear cousin by Robert Humphrey in my life. "Robert," I said, "my father is in the library. I shall have Tobias announce you." "Oh," he said, "there is no need to trouble Tobias. I know the way." He walked past me. He did not look at Otto Arthur, who was standing, as he always stood, 3 paces behind my chair. He walked past Otto Arthur, the way a man walks past a hall clock. Otto Arthur did not move. He did not turn to watch Robert go. But his weight, very slightly, had shifted forward on the balls of his feet, and he did not shift it back until the library door had closed. They were in the library for 40 minutes. I did not wait in the hall. I had too much pride for that. I wheeled myself into the morning room, and I sat with a book open on my lap, and I did not turn a single page. When Robert emerged, his face was pale under the neat brown hair. He did not look at me. He called for his coat. He called for his chaise. He was gone within 10 minutes. My father rang for me. I wheeled myself into the library. He was at his desk. He looked, for the first time in a week, as old as he was. "Your cousin," he said, "has offered to take you off our hands." "To do what?" "To marry you himself. He has a wife already, as you know. She is not in good health, he tells me. He expects her to be gone within the year. He has, in anticipation, drawn up a settlement by which he would take you as his second wife the moment he is a widower, and would, in the meantime, assume guardianship of your person and, coincidentally, management of this estate, on the reasonable grounds that a dying duke ought not to be troubled with ledgers. He is, he assures me, acting entirely out of family feeling. I could not speak for a moment. "His wife," I said at last, "is my age." "She is 23, I know. And what did you say to him?" My father looked at me. "I told him," he said, "that I would sooner see you in a grave than in his house, that I had made provision for your future that did not concern him, and that if he set foot on Windermere land again without my invitation, I would have him removed by the strongest man on it, and the story of his removal would be in every club in London by the end of the week. And he laughed, Tatiana. He laughed. And he said he would call again in the spring. And he said that by then, perhaps, I would have come to my senses. Or perhaps, I would have come to something worse. I sat in my chair in my father's library, and I understood, for the first time fully, what my father had been preparing me for since the night of the candles and the tremble. "Father," I said, "is Richard Foster in Hampshire?" "He was in Hampshire last month. He is in London now. He is dining tomorrow, I am told, at Robert's Club." I wheeled myself closer to the desk. "Father," I said, "when will Robert come again?" "I do not know. Before summer. He wants the estate. He wants to be here when I die. He would prefer to be here a little before." I was very calm. "Then," I said, "we had better be ready." He looked at me as though he had not quite seen me before. "Tatiana," he said. "Yes, father." "You are your mother's daughter." "I know," I said. "I have been told so." That night, I sent for Otto Arthur again. I received him in the small sitting room. The door to the passage was open. Olympia was within earshot, and pretending, in the way Olympia had learned to pretend, not to be. "Mr. Arthur," I said, "my cousin Robert came to the house today." "My lady." "He intends," I said, "when my father is dead, to take this estate, and to take me. He has a sick wife in Hampshire, whom he expects to be rid of within a year. He will come here again before the summer. He will bring friends with him. One of them will be Richard Foster. You have not met Richard Foster. I do not wish you to meet him unprepared. He is a small man with clean hands and an unclean mind, and he is, I believe, capable of a great deal more than he looks." Otto Arthur stood very still. "My lady," he said, "I have met many small men with clean hands." "I believe you have. When they come, Mr. Arthur, I shall need you to be at my side, not 3 paces behind me. At my side. I shall need you to speak when you are spoken to and not when you are not. I shall need you to hold your temper, though they will try to break it. I shall need you, above all, not to be drawn into a quarrel that gives them an excuse to have you dragged from this house. Do you understand?" "My lady, I understand." "Mr. Arthur, one more thing." "My lady." "If it comes to it," I said, "if they try to have you taken, I will not permit it. I do not yet know what I shall do, but I will not permit it. You have my word." He did not answer for a moment. "My lady," he said at last, "your father gave me his word, in writing, that I would have my freedom when he died. You have given me your word that you will not let me be taken. I have had many promises made to me in my life, by many men. Most of them broke before the ink was dry. These 2 I shall keep in the pocket over my heart, and I shall see which of them is kept." He bowed. He went out. I sat by the fire for a long time. I was not afraid. I was something else. I was, for the first time in 3 years, preparing for a fight. March came in wet and stayed wet. The lake thawed. The drive turned to mud. My father's cough, which had been quiet through the winter, began to trouble him at night. I began, without quite deciding to spend my afternoons in the library with Otto Arthur seated in the corner reading Cowper. It began because it was raining, and he could not stand in a corridor for 3 hours in a dry house when there was a dry chair in the next room. It continued because, once he was in the chair, neither of us felt inclined to end the arrangement. Olympia brought us tea. Mrs. Halliday, who had begun to like him very much and refused to admit it, brought us biscuits. My father, when he passed the open door and saw us there, nodded once and walked on. We read in silence, mostly. Now and then he would ask about a word. Now and then I would read him a line I particularly liked. He had a good ear. He heard things in poetry that I had not heard before. The weight of a stressed syllable, the small catch at the end of a line where the poet had held back a breath. One afternoon he closed the Cowper and he said, "My lady, this man was unhappy." He was, Mr. Arthur, for most of his life. And yet he wrote about his garden as though it were the kingdom of heaven. He did. Then, he said, "I think he must have known that a man's garden and a man's happiness are not always the same thing, and that one can love the first even when one has lost the second." I looked at him. "Mr. Arthur," I said, "have you lost your happiness?" He did not answer for a long time. "My lady," he said at last, "I do not know that I have ever had it. I think I have had glimpses of it. A pail of water from the well on a hot day. A tune that a woman hummed when I was a small child. A stone that a minister gave me because I had read my verse well. I have had glimpses. I have not had the thing itself." I closed my own book. "Mr. Arthur," I said, "neither have I." The rain struck the window. A fire burned in the grate. I should have said something else. I did not. I looked at him across the library, and he looked at me, and the thing that passed between us was not named, and it was not acted on, and both of us knew that it was there. I was a duke's daughter. He was a man who was not yet legally free. The laws of England would not marry us. The laws of England would barely suffer us in the same room. He was my father's appointed shield. I was his appointed charge. Whatever this was, it was not a thing that a book in a library or a walk to a frozen lake was going to make possible. And yet, when I thought about my cousin Robert and Richard Foster and the spring that was coming, I found that what I was afraid of was no longer losing the Windermere estates. It was no longer losing my place, or my name, or even my life, which I had thought, at various points in the last 3 years, I would not greatly mind losing. It was losing the man in the corner chair. That was the moment, I think, at which I understood that my father, in his cleverness, had been a little cleverer than he had intended. I did not say any of this aloud. Neither did he. We read. We drank our tea. He stood, at 6 o'clock, and bowed, and went to his own dinner in the housekeeper's room. I sat by the fire alone. Olympia came to wheel me upstairs. She did not ask what I was thinking. Olympia had learned not to ask things she already knew. 2 days later, my father fell. He fell in the hall, on his way to the study, in full view of Tobias and one of the housemaids. It was not a bad fall. He rose under his own power, with Tobias's hand at his elbow. But he was pale afterwards, and short of breath, and Dr. Greaves, when he came, closed the door behind him and spoke for 20 minutes in a low voice. When my father emerged, he walked directly to the library where I was sitting, and he said, without preamble, "Robert will come within the month. Greaves does not think I have until the summer. I wish the deed drawn. I wish it drawn this week. Otto Arthur will be made free on my signature, and our arrangement concerning you will be placed under the seal of my solicitors in London, where Robert cannot reach it. I shall ride up tomorrow." "Father," I said, "you shall not ride up. You shall take the carriage." He looked at me. He almost smiled. "I shall take the carriage, daughter." He went the next morning. Otto Arthur stood beside me in the drive as the coach pulled away. My father raised a hand from the window. I raised mine. Otto Arthur, a pace behind me, raised his. I did not see it, but Olympia told me later that the Duke had seen it, and that he had smiled as the coach turned out of the gates. It was the last smile anyone at Windermere would ever see on my father's face. The coach was a day and a half to London. He did his business with his solicitors on the 3rd day. On the 4th, he caught a chill in a draughty corridor at Chancery Lane. On the 5th, he could not rise from his bed. On the 6th, he sent a telegram. The telegram reached Windermere at 3:30 in the afternoon. I was in the library. Otto Arthur was in the corner chair. Olympia brought it in, her face very pale. I opened it. It read, "Come, bring him. W.H." We traveled through the night. Otto Arthur rode beside the coachman on the box, in a thick coat of my father's that was too small for him across the shoulders. Olympia sat inside with me. The roads were bad from the March rains. We changed horses 3 times. I did not sleep. We reached the house in Grosvenor Square at 9:30 the following morning. Tobias had gone ahead. My father's London butler, a man called Maitland, who had served him for 30 years, met us in the hall with his eyes red. "His Grace," he said, "is in the front bedchamber. He has asked for your ladyship. He has also asked, my lady, for Mr. Arthur." Otto Arthur had stopped in the hall. His coat was wet. His hat was in his hand. "Me, sir," he said. "You," Maitland said, and to his credit, he said it without hesitation. "If you will follow me, the pair of you." I was wheeled up the stairs in my traveling chair by Tobias and one of the London footmen. Otto Arthur walked behind. The door to my father's bedchamber was ajar. Dr. Greaves, who had traveled up with him, was standing beside the bed. He stepped aside as we came in. My father was propped on 3 pillows. His face had gone the color of old candle wax. His hair, which he had always kept very neat, was loose against the pillow. His hands, which had always been heavy and sure, lay on the counterpane like objects that had been set down and forgotten. He saw me. He smiled. "Daughter. Father." I was wheeled to the side of the bed. His hand moved. I took it in both of mine. It was very cold. "Otto Arthur," he said. "Your Grace. Come here, man, where I can see you." Otto Arthur came. He stood at the foot of the bed, his hat still in his hand, his head bowed. "Raise your head," my father said. "I did not bring you across the sea to speak to your hat." Otto Arthur raised his head. My father looked at him for a long moment. "Maitland," he said. Maitland stepped forward with a folded paper. He laid it on the counterpane. My father, with an effort that made the whole room quieter for a moment, took it up. "This," he said, "is your manumission, signed yesterday, sealed, lodged with my solicitors. A copy of it is in Maitland's hand. Another is in my daughter's charge. A third is with the Lord Chancellor's office, because I am an old man, and I trust no single piece of paper in any single drawer. You are, from this hour, a free man under the laws of England, and under the laws of every colonial holding to which this family's name is attached. You will be paid the pension we agreed. You will be paid it quarterly by my daughter's hand as long as she lives, and by the trust I have established after that. Do you hear me?" "I hear you," Your Grace. Otto Arthur. Your Grace. I have placed my daughter in your keeping. I have not placed her in your ownership. There is no law of God or England that gives one sole ownership of another, whatever the law of England may have pretended for a very long time. I have placed her in your keeping because I believed you would keep her. Will you? Otto Arthur did not speak for a moment. Your Grace, he said, I will keep her while I have a breath in my body, and I would have done so without a paper and without a pension. And I thank you for the paper and the pension, because they will let me keep her better. My father closed his eyes. Good, he said. Good. One last matter. Your Grace. My daughter, he said, without opening his eyes, is a woman who has been told, for 3 years, what she cannot have. She has been told she cannot have a husband. She has been told she cannot have a child. She has been told, by smaller men than herself, that she is not a woman at all. I have told her, in my own way, a good many of the same things, because I was afraid for her, and a frightened father is the dullest kind of fool. I am asking you, Otto Arthur, as a free man speaking to a free man, because you are one from this hour and I have always been one, whether I have deserved it or not, that when the time comes, and the time will come, because my cousin Robert is on his way to this house, and will be at the door within the week, that you will let my daughter choose. You will not choose for her. You will not carry her off. You will not marry her to keep her safe, nor refuse to marry her to keep her respectable. You will let her choose. Will you give me your hand on it? Otto Arthur came around the bed. He took my father's hand. Your Grace, he said, I give you my hand on it. My father held the hand for a long moment. Then he let it go. He opened his eyes. He looked at me. Tatiana, he said. Father. I have been, he said, a proud man, and a cold one, and I have loved you very badly, in a great many ways, and I have loved you very well in one or two. I hope the ledger balances. I do not know that it will. I am sorry, daughter. For the years I did not know how to say to you what I am saying now. You are the best thing I have made in this life. Better than the estates. Better than the name. Forgive me, if you can. And live. Live, Tatiana. Live as though you had not been told, for 1 hour of your life, what you could not have. I could not speak. I forgive you, Father, I said. There is nothing to forgive. There is only to thank. Thank you, Father. Thank you. He closed his eyes. He did not open them again. He breathed, very quietly, for another 2 hours. At 12:15 that afternoon, he breathed out, and he did not breathe in again, and Dr. Greaves stepped forward and closed his eyes with the tips of his 2 fingers. Wilfred Humphrey, 6th Duke of Windermere, was dead. And in the hall of the London house, before the clocks had even begun to be stopped in the rooms according to custom, a boy was running up the steps with a card for Maitland, and the card was my cousin Robert's, and the card said that he would call, with 2 friends, at 3 o'clock that afternoon, on a matter that could not wait. They came at exactly 3 o'clock. I had been prepared for grief. I had not been prepared for the particular strength that comes to a person when grief must be set aside for an hour so that a fight can be had. My father's body was upstairs. The clocks had been stopped. The curtains had been drawn in the front rooms. The house was dressed in the forms of mourning. And into this house my cousin Robert walked as though he were coming to the reading of a will that had already been read. He was in black. He was very neatly in black. Beside him was Richard Foster, who was also in black, though his black was softer and finer, and the cut of it a little more vain. And behind them both was a third man whom I did not know, a thin, yellow-faced solicitor named Perkin, whose eyes moved over everything in the hall as though he were valuing it for auction. They were shown into the front drawing-room. I was wheeled in a moment later. Otto Arthur was beside me, not behind, beside. I had asked him, that morning, to stand at my right shoulder, and he had done as I asked. Maitland announced us formally. Robert rose. Richard Foster rose. Perkin did not rise quickly enough, and then rose too quickly, and stood trying to look as though he had meant to rise at that speed all along. Cousin, Robert said, I grieve with you. Do you, Robert? He did not answer that. He looked, instead, past me, at Otto Arthur, and he let a small, careful expression cross his face the expression of a gentleman who has noticed something unfortunate in a room and is too well-bred to mention it. "Cousin," he said, "I will not waste the hour of your grief on long speeches. My solicitor, Mr. Perkin, has examined the dispositions your father made before his death. There are difficulties." "Are there?" "There are. Chief among them the provisions he made for you. And for this man." He did not look at Otto Arthur again. He looked at the wall behind him. "My father," I said, "was of sound mind until his last breath. He had 3 physicians to say so. He had 4 solicitors to witness so. His dispositions will stand." "Cousin," Robert said, "a duke who leaves his daughter under the guardianship of a manumitted slave, and who leaves that slave a pension out of the estate, and who lodges papers to that effect with the Lord Chancellor himself, so that no relation of the family can quietly adjust them later, is not a duke of sound mind. He is a duke in grief, or in fever, or in some final delusion of his decline. Mr. Perkin is prepared to submit a petition. A commission de lunatico inquirendo, to be held, retroactively, upon the last 6 months of my uncle's life. If it finds that his mind was not sound during the period in which he made these arrangements, every one of those arrangements will fall. You will fall with them, cousin, into my care. Which is as it should be, which is as a family should be." Richard Foster spoke for the first time. "Your ladyship," he said, in a voice I had not heard in 3 years and had not wished to hear again, "may I speak plainly?" "You may speak however you like, Mr. Foster. I cannot prevent you. I can, however, choose not to hear you." He smiled. He had the kind of smile a man practices. "Your ladyship, your father's dispositions have, I regret to say, made you the subject of a great deal of talk in the clubs. Talk of a kind that no lady of your position should endure. It is being said, and I tell you only because you ought to know, that the man standing at your shoulder is more than a guardian. That the Duke's decision was not protective, but, forgive me, sentimental. That the daughter of Windermere has been, in effect, placed in an arrangement of the most irregular kind, with a person whose origins, whose history, whose very bearing, make the arrangement a scandal that this family cannot survive. Your cousin Robert is offering, at considerable cost to his own good name, to end that scandal. He is offering you protection. He is offering you a roof. He is offering, in time, the marriage that was denied you by the misfortune of your condition. You would be, if I may say so, a fool to refuse him." I let him finish. I wanted every word of it in the air of the room. Then I looked at Robert. "Robert," I said, "is your wife dead yet?" He did not answer. "I ask," I said, "because Mr. Foster has spoken of a marriage that was denied me. You are already married, cousin. Unless your wife has died in the last week, an event of which I have not been informed, you cannot marry me, and any offer of marriage you are making through the mouth of Mr. Foster is, at best, a promise to bury your wife promptly. Is that the offer, Robert? Is that what you have come to my father's house, on the hour of his death, to make?" Perkin coughed. "Your ladyship," he began. "Mr. Perkin," I said, "I have not spoken to you. I shall if I wish to, in a moment, Robert." Robert's face had lost the last of its color. "Tatiana," he said, "you misunderstand. Foster speaks carelessly. He means, of course, a future arrangement, in the fullness of time, under circumstances. Robert, your wife is 23. She has a lung complaint, I am told. She has had it, I am told, for 2 years. She was well enough, last I heard, to be at a ball in Winchester at Christmas. How is her health this week, Robert? How is her health today? Have you inquired after her health, cousin? Or have you been too busy writing letters to my father's solicitors behind his back?" Richard Foster moved, very slightly, as though to speak. "Mr. Foster," I said, without looking at him, "if you speak, I shall have you removed. You will be removed by Mr. Maitland, and by Tobias, and if necessary by Mr. Arthur, in whose presence you have the honor of standing. You will be removed, Mr. Foster, by any man in this house who feels, as I do, that a gentleman who stands in a widow's drawing-room on the day of her father's death and tells her she is the subject of scandal in the clubs is not a gentleman at all, and that the clubs have, for many years, been confused on that point." He did not speak. "Robert," I said, "you will take Mr. Foster and Mr. Perkin, and you will leave this house. You will not return. If you submit the petition you have spoken of, I shall contest it with every penny of my father's estate, and you will find that I have a great many more pennies than you do, and a great many better solicitors. I shall also, Robert, send a letter to your wife. I shall send it by private courier. I shall tell her, in plain English, of the offer you have made here today. I shall tell her what you have said, and what Mr. Foster has said, and when you expect her, according to your own projections, to be dead. I believe she is a Lytton, is she not? The Lyttons are not a family that takes such letters quietly. Robert's mouth had come slightly open. Tatiana, he said, you would not dare? Robert, I said, I am the daughter of Wilfred Humphrey. You have just told me, in your own words, that I am a fool. I am, cousin, a great many things, and my father spent his last year on this earth teaching me which of them to use. I am not a fool. I dare before breakfast, get out of my house. I do not know, even now, what would have happened next if Robert had kept his head. He did not keep his head. He stepped toward me, half a step, his hand half raised, the gesture of a man who is about to seize the handle of a chair and wheel its occupant where he believes she ought to go. He did not reach the chair. Otto Arthur had not moved through the entire exchange. He had stood at my right shoulder. He had not spoken. He had not, I thought, even blinked often. When Robert stepped forward, Otto Arthur stepped forward also. One step. He placed himself between Robert and me. He did not raise his hands. He did not need to raise his hands. He said, very quietly, Sir, you will step back. Robert stepped back. Richard Foster found his voice. You see, your ladyship, you see. The man threatens an English gentleman in a drawing room. Is this what your father intended? Mr. Foster, I said, this man has threatened nothing. He has stepped between my cousin and my chair. If you mistake the shielding of a woman for the threatening of a gentleman, I fear for the women of your acquaintance, and I pity the gentleman. Maitland was in the doorway. Tobias was behind him. I had not seen either of them come. Maitland, I said, show these three men out. They were shown out. At the front door, Robert turned. Cousin, he said, I shall have you declared. Robert, I said, you shall not. Goodbye, cousin. Write to your wife. She is waiting for you. The door closed. I sat in my chair in the drawing room, in the silent house, with my father's body 2 floors above me and Otto Arthur at my shoulder, and I began, very gently, to shake. Otto Arthur did not speak. He knelt, so that his face was level with mine. He took my hand, which was cold, between his 2 hands, which were warm. He did not say a word. He only held my hand until the shaking stopped. Mr. Arthur, I said at last. My lady. My father asked you, I said, to let me choose. Do you remember? I remember, my lady. I am going to choose now. Not today. Not tomorrow. I shall bury my father first. I shall see Robert's petition defeated first. I shall settle this estate first. But when those things are done, Otto Arthur, I am going to choose. And I am going to choose, I think, the only thing in this last year that has made me want to keep being alive. Do you understand what I am telling you? He did not let go of my hand. My lady, he said, I understand. And when the day comes, I shall be the one who is asked, and I shall answer. But you are tired, and you are grieving, and I will not let you speak what cannot be unspoken on an afternoon like this one. Rest now. Choose later. I shall be here when you choose. He rose. He did not let go of my hand until he had risen. Then he released it, very gently, and he stepped back to my right shoulder, where he had stood through the worst hour of my life, and he stayed. My father was buried at Windermere, beside my mother, on a bright, cold morning at the end of March. The churchyard was full. The neighbors came. Lord Cosmo Pembury came, which surprised me, and which I found I was glad of. Aunt Isabella came from Bath in an enormous black bonnet, and wept with a sincerity that I had not expected, and that, upon consideration, I believed. Olympia cried through the service, and apologized for it afterwards, and I told her not to, because I had been glad of her crying when I had not been able to cry myself. Robert did not come. Richard Foster did not come. Otto Arthur did come. He stood at the back of the church, in a new black coat that fitted him, which I had ordered from a tailor in London who did not blink at the measurements. He did not sing the hymns, because he did not know them. He listened to them. When the coffin was carried out, he followed at a distance. At the graveside, he stood behind my chair, as he had stood for many months, and when the earth fell on the coffin, he reached forward, very briefly, and set his hand on my shoulder, and he took it away again, before any of the neighbors could be certain that it had been there. Aunt Isabella saw it. She did not speak of it until we were back at the house, and she had her sherry, and the last of the neighbors had gone. "Tatiana," she said, "child, tell me truly." "Truly what, Aunt?" "Truly," she said, "whether what I have heard is what I have seen." I looked at her. She was 64. She had been widowed at 40. She had raised 2 sons, had buried one of them, had survived a husband whom she had loved imperfectly, and a brother whom she had loved better, and she was drinking her sherry with the steadiness of a woman who had earned the right to drink it. "Aunt," I said, "if what you have heard is that I have chosen a man whom the world will not approve, then yes. And if what you have heard is that I intend to marry him, not today, not next month, but in the fullness of time, when the mourning is done, and the estate is settled, and the petition is defeated, then yes. And if what you have heard is that I expect the clubs to talk, and London to whisper, and Richard Foster to sneer, and Robert to threaten, then yes. And if what you have heard, Aunt, is that I do not care, then no, I care. I care very much. I simply care about other things more, and for the first time in my life, I know which things they are." She was quiet for a long time. "Tatiana," she said, "your mother, God rest her, told me once that you would be the making or the ruin of this family, and she was not sure which, and she did not much mind either way so long as it was a thing worth doing. I think you are the making. I think so because, for the first time since the accident, you look as though you are alive in your face and not merely in your eyes. I shall stand by you. I shall stand by you at church, and at the concert, and at Aunt Causeway's ball, if we must suffer such a thing. I shall not stand by Richard Foster. I shall not stand by Robert. When the time comes to see them made small, I should like to be present, with good seats, and a glass of something dry." I laughed. I laughed properly for the first time in weeks. "Aunt," I said, "you shall have the best seat in the house." Robert's petition was submitted in April. It was withdrawn in May. My father's solicitors had done their work too well. The Lord Chancellor's office had been given, in advance, every letter Robert had written to anyone in London for the preceding 2 years, because my father had employed a clerk to collect them, and that clerk had been very thorough. The petition was not merely dismissed. It was dismissed with a small, dry observation from the bench, in a voice that had been practicing its dryness for 40 years, that the petitioner had shown rather more interest in the estate than in the soundness of the Duke's mind, and that any further petition from the same hand in the same matter would be received with the attention it deserved, which would be none. Robert's wife, Lytton by birth, did not die. She received my letter. She received it on a Tuesday. By the following Monday, she had returned to her parents' house in Lincolnshire with her maid and her jewels, and the miniature of her grandmother, and she had written to her father's solicitors, and a separation was begun. Robert had the estate in Hampshire, which was encumbered, and the clubs in London, which were expensive, and no wife, and no cousin, and no prospects. He lived, I am told, another 11 years. I did not see him again. Richard Foster was a smaller problem. Men like Richard Foster are usually smaller problems than they believe themselves to be. His story spread through the clubs. He had told too many friends, over too many brandies, exactly how he intended to profit from the collapse of the Windermere name. One of those friends, a young man named Cosmo Pembury, told his mother, who told her cousin, who was married to the editor of a paper that had made its reputation on the indiscretions of gentlemen who had forgotten that paper editors had cousins. Richard Foster was not prosecuted. He did not need to be. Within a year, he had left London for a property in the Midlands. Within 2, his name was mentioned in polite society only when a hostess wished to make clear that the man being discussed was not the same, Richard Foster. For there were, she would explain, 2 of them, and the other one was the one she knew. I was married to Otto Arthur in the spring of the following year. We were married at the small church at Windermere by a rector who had been my father's friend and who did not, he said plainly in his own vestry that morning, care what the rest of his profession thought of it. Aunt Isabella gave me away, because there was no one else and because she had asked. Olympia carried my flowers. Tobias wept at the back of the church and pretended, afterwards, that he had caught a cold. I wore my mother's wedding dress, let out at the waist and altered at the hem to fall properly over my chair, and I was wheeled to the altar by my husband to be himself, because it was the only way that seemed right, and because he had asked if he might, and because when I said yes, he had closed his eyes for a long moment and then opened them again. When the rector asked me the question, I answered it with my full voice, which had not been silent for a year, and which London had not yet learned to dread. "I will," I said. When he asked Otto Arthur, my husband answered with a steadiness that did not waver, though his eyes, when I looked up at him, had tears in them that he was too proud to wipe and too honest to hide. "I will." Our son was born the following summer. He was a large child, the midwife informed me dryly, and she had seen a great many children, and she had rarely seen a larger. We named him Wilfred, for my father, and Arthur, for his father's mother, and he had his father's eyes, and a laugh that could be heard, the nursemaid swore, in the south lawn when he was laughing in the east wing. Under the settlement my father had lodged with his solicitors, the estates outside the entail came to me. I managed them. Otto Arthur did not manage them, he said, plainly and often, that he had not been given his freedom in order to become an overseer, and that I knew the land better than he did, and that he would rather build things than count them. He built. He rebuilt the summer house by the lake. He rebuilt 3 of the tenant cottages. He learned the blacksmith's trade from our own smith, because he had always had a liking for iron, and in time he taught our son to set a horseshoe before he could read properly. He went back to Jamaica, once. I did not go. My chair was ill-suited to the voyage, and I would not have kept him from going by claiming I could not bear to be parted. He took our son, who was 8. He found his mother's grave. He planted, as he had once told me he would, a tree with a hard wood, the name of which I can never remember, though he has told me it 100 times. He came home 3 months later, browner, quieter, and with a small stone from the beach near his mother's house which sits, even now, on the desk at which I am writing these words. Wilfred Arthur Humphrey is 23 this summer. He is taller than his father, which I did not believe possible. He is, I am told, the best-liked young man in 3 counties. He will inherit, under the private act we obtained from Parliament, the Windermere estates outside the entail. The title itself, by the rules of that entail, passed on my father's death to a distant cousin in Northumberland, who lives a quiet life and has never troubled us, and whose own son is, by all accounts, a decent creature. My cousin Robert did not get the title either. That, I think, would have pleased my father most of all. And I am writing this in my 50th year, at a desk by a window that looks out over the lake where my husband once carried me to see the frost, and where I now watch our son teach his own little girl to skate in red leather skates my Aunt Isabella ordered from Vienna before she died, as her last gift to the child whose birth she had sworn she would live to see. She lived to see it. She held the baby. She closed her eyes, she said, with a mind at ease. She was buried beside my mother and my father 3 winters ago, in the churchyard where I was married. They called me unmarriageable. They were wrong about me. They were wrong about him. They were wrong about the kind of house, and the kind of love, and the kind of child that could come out of a winter's night when a dying man lit 6 candles on his desk and did the one brave thing that was left to him. I forgive them. I forgive them because my father forgave himself, in the end, and taught me the value of it. I forgive them because my husband, who had more to forgive than any of us, forgave as easily as he breathed. I forgive them because my son is asleep in the next room as I write this, and a woman with a son asleep in the next room has no business carrying grudges she does not need. But I do not forget. Not one day of it. Not one. Before we reach the end, let me ask you something. If Tatiana Humphrey's fight for dignity, love, and a life of her own has touched you in any way, this is the perfect moment to subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment telling me the moment you realized Otto Arthur was not the man society claimed he was. I read those comments closely, and they truly help shape what we build here together. Thank you. Now let us finish Tatiana's story. Some stories end with justice. The rare ones end with both justice and peace. Tatiana Humphrey was told she would never be chosen, never be cherished, never secure a future, and never give her father's line what it needed most. In the end, the world that judged her was made to watch her become everything it had denied she could be. Loved, honored, the mistress of her own land. The mother of a son who laughs in the south lawn and can be heard in the east wing. Otto Arthur, whom strangers had measured only by the size of his shoulders, proved stronger in character than the men who claimed rank above him. He became a free man, a builder of houses, a husband who wept without shame on a March morning at an altar in a country church. He found his mother's grave. He planted the tree he had promised. He taught a boy to set a horseshoe and a girl to lace a red leather skate. Wilfred Humphrey, 6th Duke of Windermere, learned, too late for his own happiness, but not too late for his daughter's, that control is not the same thing as protection, and that a father's last gift to a child is often the permission to choose what the father could not give. Richard Foster kept his manners and lost his dignity, and his name became a joke told quietly in the same clubs in which he had once told jokes at the expense of others. Cousin Robert kept his ambition and lost everything that would have been worth ambitioning for. The wife he had counted on burying outlived him by a decade, and married, in the end, a country doctor who was kind to her. That, too, would have pleased my father most of all. And Tatiana, once called unmarriageable, stepped into a life so full that even the whispers could not reach it, and the only sounds at the edges of her days, in the end, were the sounds of a child laughing on a lawn, and a husband working iron in a shop, and a rook calling, once, across a lake that still freezes, some winters, into a white page upon which the birds leave their careful sentences. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, truly. Your time, your comments, your presence here matter more than you know. And the next story waiting for you is even darker at the beginning, even sweeter at the end, and built to leave you breathless in all the best ways. Until then, take care of your heart, and I shall see you in the next story. 3 quiet truths rise from the tale of Tatiana Humphrey, and I offer them to you now, not as sermons, but as small stones worth placing in the pocket over your heart. The first lesson is this: a person's worth is never settled by a chair, a scar, a whisper in a club, or a rumor at a dinner table. The people who will try to price your life have almost never earned the right to carry the scales. Set their verdicts aside. You were not born to be appraised. You were born to be alive. The second lesson is this: power without conscience is only cowardice in fine tailoring. A name, a title, a great house, a gentleman's beau, none of these are worth anything at all if the person behind them will not stand between a weaker soul and a coming harm. True strength is quiet and patient, and it does not announce itself until the moment it is needed. The third lesson is this: love, when it is joined to respect, can rebuild what grief, pride, and society have torn down. It will not come on the timetable you had planned. It will not arrive wearing the face you had imagined. It may walk into your life through the one door you had nailed shut. Open the door when it knocks. You will not regret it. Thank you.